Hello everybody, National Master Sean Lei here, back here again after a long break in order to come show you guys with some more exciting chess videos. Now for this week and the upcoming weeks, I'm going to be showing a lot of the chess games from one of my favorite chess players of all time, Aron Nimzowitsch. And today is going to be a game in which he will be playing on the black side against a player named Mattison, who is playing on the white side back in 1929. Now, the reason why I enjoy Nimzowitsch so very much compared to a lot of modern chess players and a lot of super old chess players is because he played very simply and he was a very positional player and he was who I aspired to become when I was first learning chess. Now, the reason why he was so good to learn from, especially for a beginner like me back in the day, was because people like him, like during the game, his opponents wouldn't really understand what his moves were doing, but after the game, you would realize, wow, that move had a very good purpose. Unlike a lot of the current grandmasters nowadays, when Magnus Carlsen plays a move, I'm sometimes like, what is this move trying to do? And after the game, after it's all done, I'm still confused what that move did in like the 15 move or 16 move or whatever the move was in the middle game. Now Nimzowitsch wasn't like that. Every move had a purpose, every move was simple. Now of course that comes with some negative side effects because things are so simple, their opponent could find it. But that was also one of the one of the perfect things that I really enjoy about Nimzowitsch is sometimes his opponent really couldn't do anything, even if they knew what he was planning to do. So, in this game, the opponent decided to play d4, and Nimzowitsch decided to play knight f6, c4, pawn e6. After knight c3, Nimzowitsch decided to play the Nimzo Indian. So, after the bishop e4, there are a lot of variations here. The queen c2 is one of the common ones, e3 is pretty common, but white decided to play knight f3, which is not so common, but still one of the main lines. After this, Nimzowitsch decided to take, and after pawn takes, he decided to play d6, which is definitely not one of the more common variations, I would say, but definitely it had its purpose. And just for a quick heads up, for all of you guys watching this, right now, white is going to have a strong space advantage with these 4 pawns over here. Meanwhile, black is going to have slightly less space, but his space is going to be hard to invade from white. So what black is going to try to do for the next few moves, and the reason why he played d6, is because he wants to target these double pawns on c3 and c4. And if you guys haven't watched my long-term weaknesses video, this is a perfect time to actually watch it. You just have to click the link above there. But in that video, what we learned about was to attack a long-term weakness, which these double pawns are, is we want to blockade it. And we will see how Nimzowitsch does that in the next 2 moves. So after d6, white played queen c2, black played queen e7, bishop a3 was played, then pawn to c5. And this is what we call blockading a weakness. For example, these 2 pawns, they can't move anymore. They can't move forward, and this pawn is the only one that can move, but even if it does, we could even play a move like e5, and this pawn is extremely weak, because he has no friends that can help him out over here, which can become a slight problem. So that was the purpose of this weird d6 c5 maneuver. After this white decided to play g3, and he wants to put his bishop on a very strong diagonal, which Nimzowitsch says he wants to do the same as well. So, if you decide to move this knight, eventually we can trade off the strong bishops, and this will greatly benefit black because this position is quite closed. And white never wants to capture here, no. Because if white ever captures there, it doesn't really matter which way we take, but let's just say we capture one way, well, these 2 pawns are now isolated double pawns, which mean they're doubly bad, which means they're going to be a very long-term weakness, and it will be Nimzowitsch who will be ahead in everything. So, of course, white wants black to capture, for example, if white castles here, which is what actually his opponent played in this variation. White wants black to capture here because then it will fix his pawn structure. Black has no pawns that are very advanced, and white will just have a completely better game in these variations. So how is white going to force black to capture? It's actually quite hard, and it's very difficult to do so. And so many games you will see that black never actually captures on d4 because that just benefits the opponent. Meanwhile, black wants white to capture here because then, as I said before, these doubled isolated pawns would become a great problem. So as you guys know from some of my previous videos that I've talked about, to take is a mistake, a very famous quote in chess, and this is the reason why, because if you capture, you only benefit your opponents. So in this position, black decided to castle. After white castled, both kings are safe, and white decided to trade off black's strong bishop for white's strong bishop. After king captures, which I think might have been a slight mistake, maybe knight takes was better, and the reason why is because this allows this queen to do a pretty cool maneuver that allows us to do the second step of attacking a long-term weakness. Remember, the first step is to put pressure, is to blockade, and the second step, I just kind of said it out loud, is to put pressure. So now that we blockaded it, how can we move this queen by taking advantage of the king over here to attack the long-term weakness of white? So I'll give you guys a couple seconds here. It's a very quick and a very simple maneuver. I think all of you guys can get it. And the move is queen b7, check. And this just attacks the king. It doesn't matter if the king goes back or knight f3, but the queen can slide its way to a6, as you can see through this maneuver. It attacks this bishop and attacks this pawn, and there's really only one move that can defend them both, which is queen b3. So here, black wants to keep up even more pressure on c4. Remember, we do not want to capture here. So then Nimzowitsch asks himself which piece of his is not doing anything right now and can actually be improved to attack this weakness. Now the simple answer is this knight, because it also threatens this pawn with tempo, and tempo is extremely useful. So the rook comes here to defend, and then the knight comes here, attacking both the queen and the pawn in a very nice fork. So the only move white can play in this position is to trade queens over here, and after this trade, black actually gets a very nice square for this knight. This is considered an outpost, even though there's no pawn supporting him right now, but because it's very difficult, very extremely hard for white to do anything about this super strong knight on c4. So we're attacking this bishop, and this bishop is very sad, so it's forced to move back. And after he moves back, well, black just has an extremely good position here. So my question for you guys is, if you guys were playing in this position, what would you guys do in order to finish off your opponents? So, if you guys haven't watched some of my previous videos, well, we know that when we created some weaknesses, what we can do is create another weakness that we can attack. Now remember, a weakness is something that is both easily attacked and not easily defended. And even though this pawn is pretty weak and this pawn is very weak, it's very hard for us to defend. So we need to create new avenues, which is what this pawn a6 move is doing. Now a4 doesn't quite work to defend the pawn because after capture, this pin allows us to win the rook. So what happens is they just capture, but now they have a very weak weakness on a2, which black has complete access to, making it a very big weakness and a long-term weakness. So after this, white decided to capture here. Basically, he wants to create another weakness on the black side, but it's not really a weakness because, as you guys know, this super strong knight is defending it extremely well. And so in this position, this rook decided to go to d3. And after rook d3, we just double up on this file. And things are looking very good because this pawn is falling, everything is falling, and there really isn't much that white can do about it, right? So, sorry, I don't think he played rook d3 yet. I believe what was played was probably a move like knight g2. It was knight g2, knight to d5, sorry about that, knight to d5, and after knight d5, rook d3, and after rook here, white decided to make a pretty big blunder, but it kind of makes sense in this position because there really isn't much that he can do. This is called a light square dominant strategy, in which we use the light squares against our opponent because he has a dark square bishop and no light square bishop. And as you can see that these knights are controlling extremely strong squares, and there really isn't much that white's pieces can do about it. I mean, this bishop is guarding these dark squares, but these knights are just on very nice squares that the pawns can never chase them away. Now, what you can do is play e4 to try to chase away this knight, which is what Mattison played in this position, but it is indeed a blunder. How would you guys finish off white in this position? In fact, after the next move, white just resigned because there was no hope. So, what do you think black played in this position in order to make his opponent resign the game? So I hope you guys paused your videos, and I hope you guys thought for a little bit at least. And so, if you guys did, the move was quite simple, knight to e3, and basically this pawn cannot be defended, and if you move a move like rook here, and the reason why it can't be defended is because these knights are so very powerful in these squares. And if you move rook d2, well, just this knight f3 move kinda is just killer. And if you decide to move knight here, well, there's a couple things that we can do. We can just capture that pawn over there, and yeah, and there's really not much white can do, right? Because this rook is under attack. You still can't play here because knight f3 check. So where does it go? In fact, the only square it can probably go to is rook f1. And if rook f1, basically every pawn falls. a2 falls, this e4 pawn falls. Basically, everything falls, and there isn't much hope for white. And so he promptly resigned in 24 moves, as we can see here. So what is the biggest takeaway from this game? Well, it was a quick game, but it's just a very simple, well, uh, it's a very simple and a very good example of what to do when you just see a long-term weakness of your opponent. Nimzowitsch created this long-term weakness on move 5, and then he just targets it for with the next few moves. All he wants to do is attack, attack, attack this, which he does with his super fancy queen maneuver, and then he just brings in his pieces very simply, forcing an exchange, otherwise he wins a pawn, which gives him a new advantage, which is this very strong knights on c4 and d5. And this is something that you will see a lot of good players do, which is actually quite difficult. When you have one advantage, they transition it to another advantage, which is even bigger and even harder for the opponent to defend. So after all this, he created a second weakness, which is always good to do, and eventually his opponent made a blunder, and so he won the game. Another key thing I want you guys to know is in your own games, I want you guys to be more like Nimzowitsch. Don't count on your opponent making blunders, but make moves that allow them to make blunders. Don't play for blunders, but eventually win with but with your opponent blundering because you put so much pressure on them. Now again, if you guys have any questions, if you guys have any questions about chess, or you just want to play with me sometime on chess.com or something, well, just leave in the comments below. Make sure to hit that like button because that would help me a lot in growing this chess channel, and I hope to bring even more chess content for you guys in the future. Alright, I'll see you guys around very, 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 very soon.